8. Historical time and time of existence. Earth, a small planet in the solar system, rotates and revolves around the Sun. There are many planets orbiting the Sun. Earth is the only star that has high and low temperatures, changing seasons, day and night, and thriving life. Curious scientists are eager to discover signs of life on other planets. If there were no gravitational pull between the Moon and Earth, no moving closer and farther apart, there would be no ocean life. The tides drive the winds, circulate the water, and sustain life on Earth. The fluctuations of the atmosphere work together to create, grow, and destroy everything. The Earth is like a mother's womb where the cosmic forces reside. Humans have discovered rules in the principles of nature and have constantly expanded the usefulness. Time and clocks are the greatest masterpieces of human discovery. The wisdom of counting time, discovered by observing the seasons, the changes of day and night, must have originated at the dawn of humanity. Human memory allows us to distinguish between yesterday, today and tomorrow. Memory is the link between the past and the future. It is from there that we open our eyes to time, build civilization, and sometimes create illusions that are far from the truth. Ignorance is where time exerts its power. The magic of time brings both comfort and misery to man. To dream is to imagine, that is, to borrow from a future that has not yet come. To live is to strive for the form of the future, and that is the meaning of life. Therefore, life is a dream form. Life is being alive. A dream is a future to come, a future that has not yet arrived. To frame a dream, to constantly frame a future that has not yet arrived, to bring it into the present, that is the frame of the dream. The scheme of time as past, present, and future is an easy explanation for many things. Sometimes oversimplification leads to the loss of something important. The concepts of time and space are only useful in the physical world, while we are in the physical body. In other words, many misunderstandings arise from trying to apply the laws of the physical world, especially the concept of time, to the world of the mind. The physical world and the spiritual world have two completely different sets of time laws. The conversation between Jesus and the Jews in John chapter 8 is a good example of this. Verily, verily, I say unto you, if a man keep my word, he shall never see death. And the Jews said unto him, We know now that thou art possessed with a devil. For Abraham and the prophets are dead, and thou sayest, If a man keep my word, he shall never see death. And art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead? And the prophets also are dead. Who sayest thou that thou art? Jesus answered and said unto him, If I glory in myself, my glory is nothing. But he that glorifies me is my Father, even he whom ye call your God. Ye know him not, but I know him. And if I should say, I know him not, I should be a liar as well as ye. But I know him, and keep his word. I keep his word, for thy father Abraham rejoiced to see him in his days, and was glad to see him. The Jews said to him, Are you not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. And they took up stones to stone him. But he hid himself, and went out of the temple. John chapter 8 verses 51 to 59. In the above conversation, where is the disconnect between Jesus and the Jews? How are the readers of this article participating in this dialogue? Do they simply blindly believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that what he says is true? Reading the Bible that way is one thing, reading nothing at all is another. Jesus said to the Jews, "Your father Abraham rejoiced to see what he would see in my days." But the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham." Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." If you were involved in such a conversation, how would you respond? Would you just dismiss him as mentally ill and stop talking, or would you throw a stone at him and run away? No. You'd probably say, whatever he's saying is right, so if he's saying it, I believe it, and you'd follow him. That's what people did in later times, and even more pathetically, what we do today. Rather, the plea and resistance of the Jews is more honest. It's much better to question and debate what you're saying than to say that you believe it unconditionally. What the Jews are saying here, that Jesus was less than 50 years old, is a historical truth, a factual statement made by people who know where he was born, who his brothers were, and who his parents were. It's a scientific, factual, truthful statement. In comparison, the words of Jesus are absurdly outrageous. It is impossible to say that Abraham, a man of thousands of years ago, was happy to see what he saw in his time without changing the color of his face and without being possessed by spirits. The Jews are not wrong when they say that Jesus is a demon-possessed man. The very idea of such a conversation is madness to them. So the Jews are not wrong when they say that the Jews are possessed by Jesus. So how should we understand this conversation? From the perspective of historical fact, Jesus' statement is absurd according to the Jewish understanding of time, or at least according to the logic of past, present, and future as remembered by human beings. Jesus, therefore, does not tell his story within the framework of historical context and historical time. Jesus' story is not a story at all, even though his communication with the Jews is like a clogged sewer. Jesus is telling a story on another level. If Jews did not talk about their one and only God, there might be no need to bring up Abraham, but for Jews who talk about God, it is a mistake, nonsense, to talk about the divine world in terms of historical time. It is a belief system that needs to be deconstructed. Jesus is at least saying, in a roundabout way, that if you are going to talk about God or the divine world, if you are going to talk about Abraham, you can't do it in terms of historical time. It should be exposed for the foolishness that it is. The spirit world makes it clear that it cannot be confined to time and space, so the I that Jesus is talking about is not a physical I. It is the I of the existential dimension. He says, "Do not misunderstand me, because the I that is there, that looks less than 50 years old, is not you, it is just a garment that contains me." The existential I cannot be measured by historical time. It is the same I, in the same state of being as it was in Abraham's time, now, or at any time to come. Historical time and existential time according to the Jewish concept of time, it makes no sense that the Jesus you see before you could have existed before Abraham. It's not just the Pharisees. Every life that is born and dies must think the same thing. There is a beginning and an end of physical life. There is no denying that life is subject to nothingness, the transience of time, and old age. That's why we categorize time in terms of yesterday, today and tomorrow. Through the chronology of survival and the time factor of survival, the body tries to sing the futility of life and learn the wisdom of life in its own way. It is incapable of counting time except as chronos, flowing time, and chronological time. The wisdom of time is only the wisdom of the flesh. In the language of Jesus, in his grammar, in his conversation with the Jews, historical time is nowhere to be found. The concept of historical time cannot keep up with his language, so to understand his words you have to understand the grammar of another time. The historical concept of time cannot understand his grammar. So what is the concept of time in the grammar of Jesus? It is not time in motion. It is not time flowing. Of course, the King James Version's translation of, "before Abraham was born, I am," is somewhat problematic. It says, the "I am," before Abraham. It doesn't mean I was before Abraham, but I am also he before Abraham. The original meaning of ego eimi is I am he. Here Jesus is talking about the I, before he became Abraham within the concept of flowing time. If you look at this conversation slowly, Jesus is talking about existential time, not historical time. Of course, existential time has a different meaning of time than historical time. In this conversation with the Jews, let's go beyond time and define existential time as time that is independent of the passage of time. The physical body is subordinate to historical time. Existential time is not a physical concept of time. It is a time that is only possible in the world of the mind. It is not a concept of the speed of light. It does not refer to flowing time. Existential time means that while the human body is subject to death, the mind is not subject to flowing time, but to the different kinds of existence of the mind. Just as the physical body passes through the states of infancy, adolescence, old age, and old age, so do the states of the mind. The survival of our physical body is technically a struggle toward death. The agitation of the body is toward death. When the spirit is in bondage to the body, the spirit is already the body. The mind is subject to the demands of the body and bound to the passage of time. As a wise man once said, we are born to die. Life is not much different from a train hurtling toward death. Our future is death, our body-dependent struggle for survival. It moves toward death. Hence the paradox that it is not life, but death that is possible. Historical time stops only at the death of the individual. Existential time is the archetype of a fundamental truth. The evangelist's expression that there is nothing new under the sun is nothing other than a statement that everything already exists existentially. What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun, what we call new. That it may be called new, has been in generations long past our time. Eckel. 1 to 9-10. It is true that all things are constantly changing and becoming new every day, but in terms of existence it is only the reappearance of what has already existed. The history of the present is nothing but an archetypal form of the history of the past. Therefore, what is new is not new at all. It's just a reappearance of what already existed. In generations long past, it was already there. The evangelist is saying that the ontological type already exists as an archetypal type beyond time. Existential time is not time that passes. It is time that simply exists. The reason there is no time is because the level of existence that each individual comes in contact with is always different. The Bible uses the word kairos to distinguish from chronos, the moment of contact between different levels of existence. The time of kairos is a vertical time of encounter with existence, a time when the individual comes face to face with existence. It is not a time that flows, but rather a time that approaches, a time that attracts. Therefore, the time of kairos is like a season. Different plants grow differently depending on the season. The time of life is also arranged differently for each season of existence. It has nothing to do with physical age. Each person's time is different because his spiritual age has nothing to do with his physical age. That the seasons are different. Israel's feasts include the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, Thanksgiving, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Gathering, the Feast of Tabernacles, and the Feast of Dawn. The Hebrews use natural feasts as metaphors for spiritual feasts. The spiritual journey is described as a time of kairos. It explains, the state of being is different at each time. What is the existential struggle of a person with a mind? Even if he cannot identify it himself, the stirring of life is a proof that it is oriented toward something called love. The spirit world is always looking for love, seeking it, knocking on it, and moving toward it. Just as all plants revolve around the sun, the spirit of life revolves around love. Therefore, existential time is oriented toward love, which is agape. Existential time is possible because there are many existential dimensions on the way to love. Existential dimensions do not flow. They always exist in a circular form. For example, when John the Baptist is said to be the second coming of Elijah, it means that they are existentially the same, not that they are physical incarnations or reincarnations. That is the basis of existential time. The physical body is bound to flowing, uninterrupted time, but the mind is open to existential time. There are kinds of life that come and go for hundreds of generations. These are the kinds of existence, so to speak. There is nothing new, because yesterday's history is being repeated today. Discursive structure of the Bible is made up of stories. Notice in particular that the Old Testament is all narrative. The New Testament is also narrative, not only in the form of the four Gospels, but also in the form of the Acts of the Apostles, which are accounts of the activities of the Apostles. It's a huge mistake in reading the Bible to overlook the fact that, with the exception of Paul's letters and a few books, it's all stories. How ridiculous it would be to call the history of Israel a story and try to read it as a historical event when you take the time period and the events in the story and interpret them as historical facts. The Bible is not a history of Israel. The story is set in the context of the time in which it was written. The story has a conflict centered in the life of the main character. There is a crisis, an overcoming, and a conclusion. From Genesis to Revelation, with very few exceptions, it's a story, a narrative. Even when the history of Israel is in the background, it is only a backdrop and a prop for the story, not the factual elements of the events themselves. Most theologians are more concerned with the historical facts of the events in the story and their authenticity than with the author's intentions in including them in the story. Stories are not so much about whether the events in them are true or false. It's more about the author's intentions and the spirituality of the story. Debating whether a story is true or false is like debating whether Harry Potter is real or fictional. It's up to the reader to absorb the spirituality of the story. It's nonsense to try to frame the story in terms of history and the rules of time. Some critics debate whether the characters in a novel are real or fictional, but that's part of the point of being immersed in a story, because there are universal types of people that interpret me today and contain aspects of my dimension of existence. A novel is meaningful for the existential time it contains, not for its historical facts. Even if you read Park Kyung-ri's, famous female writer of the Korean language, novel Land, which was written against the background of the modernization process, there is a human story in the historical background of our modernization process, and the reader reads it. But no matter how vivid the historical background is, the reader is not attached to the authenticity of the background. If there is no human history, the story is meaningless. The factual history of the Japanese invasion is the background of the story. It is also closely related to how we should read the Bible. The story of the Bible may have its own unique narrative structure, but the context of the text is the time of crisis and conflict and the historical situation of Israel. There is a context around the time of Moses. Real historical figures from that time may appear in the story. The story cannot be woven without the context of the time period. It is up to the writer to determine how the historical circumstances are arranged. What is called organic inspiration in theology is the theory that the Bible was written by inspiration, without transcending such cultural events and without excluding the various personalities and characteristics of the author. Nevertheless, don't let the props and historical facts distract you. To a certain extent, they are necessary to understand the subject. If you treat the extras as the protagonists, they don't really understand the story. In addition to facts, writers can use fictional characters to convey meaning, sometimes using symbolic metaphors. The Bible is not intended to be a record of historical facts. It is not intended to be a record of historical facts. The stories of the Bible involve many different kinds of beings. This means that even when real historical figures like Saul, David, and Solomon appear in the narrative, we should pay attention to the narrative logic of the Bible that uses them to reveal types of beings. There is nothing new under the sun. How many times has it been repeated, and how many times will it be repeated forever? So, ontologically speaking, when the evangelist says there is nothing new under the sun, he is not in the present. We are only living in a past existential time. The future is nothing but a repetition of the past. The future is only the coming past, another past. This means that historical time is meaningless. Our consciousness must now move from historical time to existential time. The Christian view of history is a horizontal view of history, and in this respect it is fundamentally flawed. It begins with the error of viewing the biblical concept of time as merely horizontal. It is dominated by the deceptively simple idea that there is a creation of the universe and an end of the universe. The biblical beginning and end do not refer to the beginning of the physical world and the end of the physical world as such. The types of beings to which the Bible refers can be broadly categorized as physical and spiritual. Spiritual existence can be categorized as the seven-day creation and the existence of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Are you in God Abraham's plane of existence? If so, you are living in the time of Abraham's existence. Abraham is the ancestor of faith, the beginning of faith. When faith was born and left Ur of the Chaldees, Abram's life began. When you are 100 years old and you have given birth to Isaac, the child of promise, and so you send Ishmael into the desert and live a life of freedom, you are Isaac. You are living at the level of Isaac's existence. When you've gone one step further in the life of freedom, past the conflict between Esau and Jacob, and the life of Jacob unfolds for you, you now serve the God of Jacob and you are Jacob. Jacob's way of being is fulfilled in you. Let me give you another example. Adam's story is my story. It is the same story of me, existentially. The eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil should not be understood as something that happened at one point in history or in the same time frame. It is strictly a pre-existent record of the type of me that is eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil right now. How wrong it is to see the historical cause of human sin as the beginning. The roots are too deep. The type of existence of Abel and Cain, the type of existence of Abraham, there was, there is, and there will be. Many of the stories in the Bible are archetypes of the same thing. In this sense, it is possible for Jesus to say, I am, before he became Abraham. His I is certainly the same as the I before he became Abraham. This I is always the same I, the I, into which we must ultimately be reborn. Abraham was also the I to be encountered, and he rejoiced when he finally saw the I. Life in historical time is oriented toward death, but existential time has love and holiness as its ultimate orientation. There are many existential archetypes, and our mind is constantly moving from one type to another to finally reach the world of love. The mind is oriented towards love and sacredness. It is time travel in its various forms, sailing toward eternal agape. As we said earlier, to say that John the Baptist is Elijah is to say that John the Baptist is the same type of being as the Old Testament prophet Elijah. It means that their mental states inhabit the same type of existence. In that sense, John the Baptist is Elijah, which is possible in the spirit world, not the physical world. This should be a clear distinction. When I read the Bible, I have to see what existential time is involved in me right now, or what gap there is between me and it. To lose sight of this and become obsessed with historical facts is the height of folly. Existential time is a life oriented toward a gap, and historical time is imbued with the logic of survival. They are opposites, but they are also complementary, for the spirit dwells in the body. They are opposed in that the mind of the flesh opposes the desires of the spirit, and the desires of the spirit oppose the desires of the flesh. However, human beings can attract existential time, which is life-oriented, within historical time. Everything that happens while you are bound to historical time is a message, a sign, an awakening to existence. Those who travel in the spirit world know this very well. Just as the gourd vine greatly awakened the consciousness of the sleeping Jonah, the many events in our lives are messages urging us to move into existential time, regardless of their physical benefit or futility. It's a matter of how we don't get caught up in the flesh, but how we create a race that nourishes life, preserves life, and again sets out on a journey toward holiness and love. But if the mind is caught up in the flesh, the spirit will be corrupted by the desires of the flesh. It will think only of the flesh. Such was Cain, such was Ishmael, such was Esau. All that they call love, all that they call humanism, is still the lust of the flesh. Let's listen to the existential meaning that the biblical text is trying to engage us with. The intersection of historical and existential time, like the intersection of seed and warp to weave a cloth, is our desire for unity, for the fusion of flesh and spirit into one.